Guess you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
Yeah, welcome to Inside the Numbers, everybody, with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. Today it's time for George and Peter for the Gaggle. But before we do that, a couple things I want to just bring up real quick, and then we'll bring them on. We'll talk about the latest in Ukraine, Russia, and some of the things that we see with the public polling project. All right, everybody on YouTube, thanks. Hit the thumbs up button if you like our videos. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. But we are, of course, imploring everybody to move over to Rumble. Sign up, at least for the Rumble People's Pundit YouTube channel. People's Pundit Rumble channel. And while you're there, check out the Join Locals button right up over there. We're doing pretty good with that. So these pitches seem to be working, right? But the bigger the community gets, the better the coverage for 2022 will be. That simple. All right. Now, before we get into, yes, we were polling. The public polling project was in the field this weekend. We were polling, and the results will be out soon. I just want to clear up a couple things because I got a lot of messages before I bring on, I see Peter's here. But before I do that, I have to address this. All right. Which is everybody gets to see the overall results of the public polling project. You don't have to join locals to do that. All right. People who contribute, obviously would expect it, whether they themselves are supporters, not just members, but supporters on locals. That being said, the cost of doing the public polling project is a lot more than the public figure is on the contribution form. All right. Or I should say it should be. And, we've argued for a long time that there's more accurate and even more cost efficient ways to poll at this point. You can't skimp because you won't reach enough people or enough of each group. That is obviously important to the survey in hand. But that being said, it's still nearly half the cost of anything that even one of the cheaper pollsters will quote you out there for doing. So you have to understand, people who sign up on locals and become supporters are not, everyone's going to get the results, but they're going to get the results first. And they're going to get exclusive aspects to those results that other people are not going to get. We do a lot more than any other poll out there. I have no qualms about saying this. There are other pollsters I like and respect their work. They still don't put out the amount of information that we put out. And if you want in-depth stuff, then, locals is the only place you're going to get it. So for the people who say to me all the time on social media, not everybody has money to give it, but we should all be able to see the results. You do see the results. You just don't get personal interactions or knowledge of these surveys or nested variables and complex in-depth crosstabs or access, frankly, to the Evervis charts that you could browse through. They're the ones who make it possible. It's not free. And it's not cheap. And the numbers you typically see are not, any pollster will tell you, are not the numbers. Let's just, for one example, it often happens where somebody will come to me and get a quote and then tell me what another pollster gave them. A pollster who we all know, and probably most of you tend to like and respect, for instance, quoted a project at $10,000 that we quoted at about $6,000. It's not that we beating them hands down like that, but this was a much smaller population than a national survey. The cost of doing business in this industry is high. All right. So this idea, like there'll be this wealth of information for free out there, then you're not, then look, if you want that, that's NBC News for you. That's CNN for you. Because believe me, it's free to you, but it's not free to them. And someone is sponsoring their work. And those sponsors are influencing their work. So if you want accuracy, if you want something done without special interest with their hands up there, then this is the only way. And for a lousy $5 a month, I don't think that's too much to ask. All right. So, I got a lot of that this weekend. And I got to be honest with you, it bothers me a lot. How's Glenn Greenwald going to report and be independent if you don't pay for his Substack? How are the guys at the Gaggle, who we're going to bring on in a second, going to give you accurate assessments on foreign policy unless you help them and you support them? It seems like there are a lot of people who really just want the best of both worlds. They want all these independent, wealthy people out there to just like go around and make it their mission to give them the best information possible. That's just not reality. There are two business models: public funded and special interest funded. And that's all there is. All right. So with that in mind, I guess I see George, he's still getting ready. But Peter, I'll bring you on, my friend. First of all, thanks for joining us. I'll bring George in when he settles in a second. Before we get into anything, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know what you guys charge on locals, but Peter, the crosstab software that we run, thousands of dollars, Peter. Most of this stuff is a monthly fee, thousands of dollars. I mean, I don't think people really understand, like, where the hell they think this is coming from. Like, $5 on locals is like too much to ask. And plus, everybody does see those crosstabs anyway. They just don't get the really in-depth goods,
Yeah, if you don't want to pay, just rely on CNN. Oh my God, live in that world, okay? Live in that world.
Pfizer will pay the bills then, Peter. Pfizer will pay the bills.
That's right. And if you
watch Fox News, the Saudis are paying the bills. And they started Fox News.
They get the results they want. Okay, that's the way it is. Okay, I mean, in my personal case, I mean, I've just been on the receiving end of an onslaught. I'm demonetized. I'm deplatformed. I'm everything. I'm on Twitter apparently, but I can't get into my homepage. I can't.
Why don't you tell everybody what's going on here? All right.
But I'll tell you. I mean, the reason why I'm mentioning Twitter, because this is particularly vicious, is that they keep sending me notifications that people are mentioning me or something like that, and I can't even get rid of that because I can't go into Twitter. So they're like torturing me all day long.
You can't defend yourself.
Hit the notification, and then it won't open up.
The irony of what's going on with you, and I'll bring George on here. He looks ready. The irony of what's going on with you, thank you, Laura, is you had a show, and it's RT, so oh my God, everybody run for the hills. You had a show, but it was called Crosstalk, and I've been on it. And what's neat about it is you'll have like a populist, a conservative, a libertarian, a progressive, a corporate kind of Democrat, whatever. And everybody just kind of like debated. It was like the old school town hall kind of platform, like the old Lincoln Douglas times maybe 3 more. It depends, like, it depends how many guests you had on. And it was, like I thought the first time I went on, I was like, well, that was cool because that was an actual debate, or really you could jump over somebody, talk to somebody. The irony here, Peter, is that they took out a show where you can actually exchange ideas.
Yeah, and George, right now, both of you have been on Crosstalk, and that I always say Crosstalk rules in effect. And the primary rule is everybody gets the same amount of time. Okay, that's it. That's all I want. Everyone gets the same time. And debating the most important issues of our time right now are forbidden in the mainstream. And they go after you viciously. I mean, CNN did a hit piece on me. They didn't call me. They didn't ask me a question.
Sorry.
They just smeared me. That's it.
Say that again. Who was that? Because it glitched a little bit. I was trying to kill our audios.
CNN did that to me.
Okay. And let me ask you a question. Have you ever had anyone come to you before Crosstalk and tell you, we want you to push this like Russian propaganda today? No, I mean, let's get to the heart of it. I mean, Peter, has that ever happened to you?
One real example, I always mean, the truth is always the best thing, okay? Because it never haunts you. The truth never haunts you, okay? I don't know if you remember, George probably remember as a encyclopedic mind. And then I'll ask George. George, what was the year that the Turks shot down that Russian jet?
2015.
2015. Okay. So big deal, right? And as I was going into my studio, my boss took me aside and he said, "Peter, I have a special request. I would just like you to be completely normal. Just ask questions and don't put yourself into it." He said, because there are negotiations behind the scenes. They're very delicate, and we're a state media outlet, and so we have to be very careful. I've been doing this for 17 years. There was only one time my boss said, "Peter, can you just kind of cool it?" And but your guests can say whatever they want, of course, okay? But it was the only time, and because those negotiations were important, I said, "Yeah, I can do that. Okay, I can do that." Okay. Everybody knows that I'm Erdogan. I don't have the most fond feelings about the Turkish president. But on that one program, I just kind of put myself aside and let other people criticize him. So it was the same result.
Yeah. So it's funny because what we talk about, what is misinformation, and actually, I mean, I'm gonna show two examples today that both are around COVID and what we talked about with the origins of COVID. And then Snopes is coming out. They have a fact check out saying, talking about no, there's no U.S. biological bases in Ukraine. Some nice, real game playing with words. All right. But now we have several studies showing in multiple European countries the presence of antibodies before anyone ever believed COVID was on the radar, and definitely before the people who pushed the wet market origin story said that it appeared in the wet market. Okay, so this is like something very similar where today is like illegal. Let's just call it illegal information or illegal thoughts to have. And 6 months to 12 months later, those illegal conspiracy theories and views become known fact. All right. And I'll tell you, I get a little bit throughout Trump, guys. There was the left's just like propensity to believe anything and everything that the authorities said. And anyone who gave pushback on that became like a Russian agent, right? Today is a little bit even somewhat more concerning because there are a lot of people supposedly even now on the right who are doing the same thing. So you have supposed conservative talk radio hosts calling Republicans who disagree with all-out war with Putin the Putin wing of the party. All right. And you're pushing. And now today they're using a Snopes fact check, a left-wing fact check. All right. They're using a Snopes fact check to say that anyone who was talking about bioweapons after Victoria Nuland brought them up in a freaking Senate hearing is also pushing Russian propaganda. All right. So this is now right-wing doing what they criticized the left doing it under Donald Trump. So now the right's doing it too. And I have no problems bringing it up. So we'll hear from the Sean Hannitys and the Mark Levins, no doubt, later on their radio shows. All right. So now they have Snopes to cite. They're going to bring this up. I guarantee you, folks, mark my words. Maybe they'll hear it and they'll decide to, use other. But what do you think about this, George? How can we operate and have these honest discussions if this is the pattern that apparently both sides are willing to follow? George, come on, what are we doing?
You're absolutely right, and that's a very good example that you cite with this the Sean Hannitys and the Mark Levins, who have immediately reverted back to what they were circa 2002. Let's go to war with Iraq. Dismiss all of the people who were the skeptics who were saying, hey, I don't think there's much evidence that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Hey, I don't think there's much evidence that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11. Hey, I don't think there's much evidence that Saddam Hussein has anything much to do with Al-Qaeda. All of those skeptics were swept aside, and you were a Saddam apologist if you uttered any of these words. Then they kind of pretended to be non-interventionists when Trump came along on the scene in 2015. So yeah, right on, yeah, America first, yeah, that's where I am. But now here they are. They're doing all of this nonsense with Putin, and that was very interesting because Jennifer Griffin, who's the Fox News's Pentagon scribe, and detested Trump. Throughout the Trump years, she was pushing Russiagate. And there she was on Hannity, and then she mouthed some talking point. This was on the day of Victoria Nuland's testimony. So she mouthed some Pentagon talking points, and then Hannity kind of asked her, so the Victoria Nuland, I mean, but she kind of raised some issues that hasn't been answered yet, has it? They said, oh no, it's all been answered. Yes, the Pentagon has already answered it. I'm reading the fact sheet. It's all been answered. Nothing to worry about here at all. And of course, as you say, Rich, they're just playing games with words here, because no one has said the United States has a bioweapons program in Ukraine. That's not quite the issue. So they're kind of throwing, destroying a straw man. Well, the issue is, are they conducting bio experiments in Ukraine that can be used as a bioweapon? And of course, that's what they are doing. And it's actually even in conformity with the Biological Weapons Convention, that as long as you're doing research that can be used for defensive purposes, you can do this kind of essentially bioweapons research. And I'm sure that's exactly what they're doing, and how they've justified what they're doing in Ukraine and Georgia and other places. Well, we're just working out a vaccine just in case there's a Russian attack. But of course, if you're working out a vaccine, that means you have a large inventory of all kinds of extremely dangerous bioagents. And they've been doing this gain of function. In other words, they made these agents, these pathogens, a lot more lethal than they would have been otherwise. That's part of the experiment. And that's how we get to the COVID thing, which was they made this particularly lethal. They made it particularly susceptible to humans. And of course, we're just doing it because we're trying to anticipate what the other side is going to do. We want to develop a vaccine, even though they never did develop a vaccine for the COVID.
Yes, and George, also to add on to that, one of the first versions of it is that, they're just dealing with a Soviet era.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, let me. Okay, go ahead, George.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm done.
I meant Peter. I'm sorry, I meant Peter. Go ahead, Peter. Finish your thought.
No, I just wanted to add on from what George had to say is that, Victoria Nuland, I mean, unfortunately, George and I know Victoria Nuland's history very, very well. I mean, wherever she goes, car accident, major scale, okay? She's someone that has failed upward, and that's how these elite works. You wreck someplace, you destroy something, you get promoted. Looking at her testimony with little Marco, that was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen in my life. I think George agrees with me here. I mean, first of all, she was supposed to say no, okay, but she knows there's something going on that she can't control, and she's very worried about it, okay? And of course, Marco came to her rescue, and of course it was the Russians' fault, okay? I mean, what kind of public discourse is that? I mean, it was really, really not only odious, but very scary.
Let me read from the Kiev Post, or let me read from Snopes what they cite. Okay, so according to SBU, and this is from the Kiev Post, which they're saying that the U.S. Defense Department's Biological Threat Reduction Program provided some funding to upgrade biolabs in Ukraine. These facilities are operated by the Ukrainian government. I want everyone to understand what the wordplay that they're engaging in here. And from the Kiev Post, as if like the Kiev Post is, first of all, in America, the AP and the New York Times and the Washington Post, they're not even credible anymore to cite as propaganda-free outlets. But they're citing the Kiev Post here, and I want to read it so people can understand the wordplay. According to the SBU, in 2005, the Ministry of Health of Ukraine and the U.S. Department of Defense signed a framework agreement to prevent the spread of technologies, pathogens, and knowledge that can be used in the development of biological weapons. First of all, if you speak to anyone who has been in this arena, who is, at real world experience, as what Peter just said is 100% true. It's always under the guise that they are preventing the spread. Okay. And as part of this agreement, by the way, for instance, CIA, the games they play with biological weapons, they'll do it under USAID. All right. So, I mean, this idea that, you know, that these programs don't have dual purposes or even more than that is ludicrous. But anyway, as part of this agreement, a number of state laboratories located in Odessa, if I'm saying it wrong, whatever, on and on, regions were modernized. Repair work was carried out, equipment was updated, supplies were purchased, etc. Quote, we emphasize that these laboratories are financed from the state budget, are subordinate to the Ministry of Health and the State Service on Food Safety and Consumer Protection. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, the problem with that right there is that that's what happens when you have a government like we have in Ukraine right now, which is essentially a satellite of the West. Okay, so the regime that was the democratically elected regime in 2004 was removed by a U.S.-led coup. That's just the fact. And you can say what you want, that they're run by people in Ukraine, but the fact is everyone knows where this money's come from. The state budget, okay, that's for conservatives who want to use that. You're essentially making the argument Planned Parenthood makes when they argued that it was no use of your taxpayer dollars to fund abortion. Okay, because you're giving them money that is then supplanted for other, you know, you're supplanting things in their budget. And you're giving them money, whatever. Maybe it is used for something totally different, but it's then money freed up in the other parts of the state budget that they can then use to implement these programs. That's the problem with foreign aid. You're funding that government's activities, whether you're doing it directly or not. And by the way, I'm not even sure I believe that. All right, but I'm not even sure I believe their current explanation, because we've heard these before, haven't we, gentlemen? Have we not heard this before in the course of 30, 40 years, and it all turned out to be lies anyway? It's like as if this type of behavior is beneath them or something. Like this would be a first. We would hear a tall tale like this. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not the first. It wouldn't even be the second or third or fourth time. This is the playbook. But even if they're being honest here, they're using the same argument that conservatives, that Planned Parenthood would use, that, you know, against conservatives, you know, arguing that we're violating the Hyde Amendment, which is now obliterated, but we're violating the Hyde Amendment by using taxpayer-funded abortions through your tax dollars. It's the same thing. I mean, let me throw it to George. George, what? Even if we believe him, George, I mean, the idea that we're still not funding this, or the barbarism in eastern Ukraine and this, you know, the Donbass, for instance. I mean, come on, what do you think?
No, you're spot on. It's what is known as plausible deniability. So you basically pretend that Ukraine is running this program and said, oh, no, well, I mean, that's just, you know, we're just trying to help them. You know, they were trying to work out a, you know, help them with their public health program. So that's exactly what Americans always do. There's this sort of plausible deniability. I mean, you know, we've seen all this stuff, you know, the wars in Central America, and then the horrific killings that took place there. And the Americans will say, well, we were doing our best. You know, we were actually giving them human rights training. We were doing exactly the opposite. I know we found all these priests, you know, half a dozen priests who had their throats cut by the very people that we've been funding and training. But no. I mean, they just did this off their own bat. You know, we were actually teaching them to be good human rights attorneys. So, of course, this is what they're doing. And I think that's why, just go back to the point that I made earlier, they have the plausible deniability that, well, we're not violating the Biological Weapons Convention. We're not actually creating, you know, building biological weapons. We are protecting them from the horrible Russians. Because the Russians, yeah, they have a biological weapons program. Yeah, no question there. But we have to anticipate what they're doing. And then they can say, well, we're actually in conformity with the Biological Weapons Convention. But, you know, it is all completely nonsensical. And the fact is that if you were doing serious research, why are you doing it in Ukraine, where there isn't even any kind of a proper infrastructure to make sure that?
Well, and George,
if
I could just add too, I mean, if this, as they claim, if this is from Soviet era pathogens and technology, then, well, the Russians already have it. So, I mean, that doesn't make any sense either. And plus, 30 years you've been managing this stuff. I thought you should just destroy it. I mean, It doesn't make any sense what they have said. It does
Peter,
make sense
Snopes,
to avoid.
Why didn't
It
Snopes address Victoria Nuland at all? The comments made by Victoria, that's what people understand the word games. What Peter was just saying. I don't mean to jump in. I want you to speak to this. They would have addressed what Victoria Nuland was saying if it was simply a question of whether or not we are doing this when, in some backdoor kind of way. They didn't address her at all because they're playing the word game you're talking about, Peter. But go ahead, speak to that.
Well, I think it's really obvious why it was mentioned, is that it's a card they want to play as this military conflict continues in Ukraine. They want to say in this city some kind of bioweapon was detonated, and we know, of course, who did it. I think that's what they're doing, because it was, you hear all of this ridiculous rhetoric on cable TV and the broadsheets. Ukraine is losing this war very badly, okay, and it's almost over. And what they need to do is to have an incident, what are those? Something must be done, incidents to rally the forces to get involved, to escalate this conflict. That, to me, that's very simple.
Yeah, George, I want to go back to you. Yeah, George, take it, because, for a week now, it seems like we've been gearing up for a Lusitania kind of moment, a Gulf of Tonkin moment.
I agree. The Lusitania is a very good example, a good Gulf of Tonkin example. We had a number of those examples during the 1990s in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where on a regular basis, we had these explosions in the Sarajevo marketplace. There was one in 92, there was one in 94, there was one in 95. And each time, it was always in the same place. And each time, there were a lot of people who were killed. And right away, the Serbs were blamed. And right away, there was a huge drumbeat. So we got, NATO must get involved. NATO must get involved. But where the UN people who were on the ground, there were UN peacekeepers on the ground, said, this isn't plausible. There's no way that a rocket fired from miles away could have possibly caused this amount of death and carnage. They suspected that this was a bomb that was planted here, and therefore it was, the people who were the victims of the bomb, who were responsible for the planting of that bomb, or at least the government, which was the Bosnian Muslim government. So we had that, of course, in the in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but we had an even more striking cases in Syria, where when Obama said, "Oh well, here's my red line. Red line is the use of chemical weapons." Boom! There's suddenly an explosion of the use of chemical weapons, and again, it made very little sense because Syrian government was obviously winning the war. And why would he want to use chemical weapons, particularly when Syria was being inspected at that very moment by United Nations inspectors?
Same thing with Russia, gentlemen. This idea that Russia would be behind, like Victoria Nuland suggested in the conversation with Marco Rubio, the idea that they would be behind a chemical weapon makes zero sense from a not only realpolitik. Use your logic. Use your reason. It makes no sense. Russia, the Russian army, who has, I think that last week or so, the West has started to slowly learn that Russia was not, their initial military action was not, playing like we talked about the last time on your show. They were not playing to invade in blitzkrieg. They were basically very clearly taking out military capabilities that Ukraine had. They were taking out infrastructure. It was not a shock and awe kind of strategy that the West has gotten used to since the invasion of Iraq, or even the left hook in the war to liberate Kuwait. All right, I got I got to upload it, but I got a clip I want to play, which is important because eventually, these escalations lead to something. And I don't see a point for Putin to do a chemical attack, especially after they laid the groundwork for this. But you have people like Lindsey Graham and others running around making the most ridiculous statements. Robert Barnes and I shredded this idea that the Russian people are going to kill Putin. We did it last week. His approval rating is through the moon, higher than any U.S. president has had in a very long time. And why? Why was that? And we went over the economics of it. throughout the post-Cold War, immediately after the Soviet Union fell, the Western management of the decline of the Soviet Union, how bad things were until boom, Vladimir Putin comes. You could plot it with a plot band on a line graph, everything from inflation, poverty, crime rate, whatever. And even after he took Georgia, after he took Crimea, all of these Western economic offenses we went on with sanctions didn't really do anything to hurt the Russian people. Let's face it. And now we have this kind of really economically incompetent argument about destroying or devaluing their currency, which is one of the more ludicrous things that most economists will hear, because of course, folks, use your heads. Why are we always complaining about China devaluing their currency? What kind of economy is Russia? If you know about the impact that currency value has on exports and imports, you would see that's a completely asinine argument from how Vladimir Putin has structured the Russian economy. But anyway, I want to play this thing by Graham, because last week this idiot was running around talking about assassination. Here he's talking about it. We can basically go to the brink of nuclear war because it's all a bluff. Let me play this, and I'll go to you first, George. All right.
In Ukraine, can't the U.S. and NATO allies do more?
Yeah.
Without turning this into World War III?
We could if we had a... Well, it's not going to be World War III. This is all a bluff. Putin knows that no one wins a nuclear exchange. So if he ordered a preemptive strike on the United States, some general would shoot him in the head. I'm calling for the crushing of the Russian economy. Even though our war and fight is not with the Russian people, it is with Putin. And the only way this war ends is with Putin either going to jail or be taken out by his own people. How do you make that happen? You help the Ukrainians. They need MiGs.
Okay, this idiot we played a video of last week. This is on him. The death in the Donbass that we showed last week on the show. That's on Lindsey Graham, the year of offense. Remember, Lindsey, the year of offense cost the lives of women and children. Vladimir Putin is supposed to be a murderer of women and children, and that's Lindsey Graham's justification for killing him, for assassinating him. So, Lindsey, I mean, how many women and children, have you killed with funding the Ukrainian army? How much of their blood is on your hands? What about Iraq, Lindsey? It's not a conflict this guy, George, hasn't supported. And he is directly responsible for a lot of this, or a lot of that bloodshed. And I hate to see it, though, because we polled this weekend, and George, the number of people who are more open to attacking Russia has definitely increased. It's not at majority support, but it has definitely increased because a lot of them, as we can clearly see, do not believe that they're believing dumb people like him, which is that they do not believe that this will escalate into a World War III situation, or at least those people who have, changed their minds and opened up to this. It doesn't have to be World War III, George. I mean, it doesn't have to be nuclear to be World War III, George. This is so dumb. Go ahead, speak to that.
It is so incredibly dumb. The whole idea that the Russians are bluffing is just so cretinous. It's almost unbelievable that we're even discussing this. If there's one thing to now learn from Putin, he doesn't bluff. He promised in December, when he presented those draft security treaties, that if you don't respond to our security concern, we will have to take unilateral measures, military technical measures. They did it. And Putin has been very, very explicit. I mean, you look at his body language. This is not a person who is bluffing. Peter knows this as well. I mean, it's like when, in 1956, in Hungary, there was a lot of talk, in Washington about liberation and rollback of communism. Who was bluffing? It was the Americans who were bluffing. Hungary, the Russians sent in, a massive army to crush the Hungarian uprising, and they knew perfectly well that the Americans were just bluffing, promising that they were going to come into fight a war on behalf of the Hungarians. No, it's people like Lindsey Graham who's bluffing. If they try to impose a no-fly zone, I am 100% certain, 100%, that the Russians would immediately shoot down any American aircraft, and they would immediately launch attacks on all of the NATO airfields. They would destroy all of the NATO infrastructure with their radar installations, their airfields, and all their surface-to-air missiles. everything would be destroyed immediately by the Russians. Then, you know, World War III, no World War III, they're going to do it. And you know, for Lindsey Graham to start talking like this to Americans, is, oh yeah, we're just bluffing because Putin's a bad guy and bad guys bluff. It just shows the height of irresponsibility that prevails in American media.
We shoot down a MiG, and that Putin is going to take action, and the Chinese are going to back him, and it is that simple because they have their own concerns with U.S. meddling in their sphere, where it is an existential threat to them. It's, you know, this is driving me nuts a little bit because, Peter, I go to you here and ask you this. What do you think about this story? It's like 3 days ago where Russia did supposedly hit a NATO installation. And there were, you know, the Western media was going on and on about innocent people and how it wasn't even a military target. First of all, we don't know that's true, Peter. All right. Number two, second of all, as if the U.S. doesn't do this as well when they're engaged in actions. Like, so I fear that people are not able to separate, you know, they're not able to be, like, individuals are not able to be rational here when it comes to foreign policy. And this emotional insertion all the time, the U.S. does, the West does in general, has no place in foreign policy, in smart foreign policy. Emotionalism has no place. What do you eventually, first of all, what do you make of that report? And then eventually,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
What's really interesting, George and I talked about this on the Gaggle. We found it really quite curious that Western media claims that 37 people were killed. They didn't say soldiers. They, you know, though it's a hub for NATO training for the Ukrainians, but they said 35 people. They didn't say officers and soldiers or anything like that. And number two, I mean, you know, that's well into the second week of the war. And that shows an enormous amount of restraint on the side of the Russians, because they know that base is there. According to Western media, again, George and I talked about this, that this has been going on since the 1990s. So it's not like it suddenly came on the Russians' radar. So they're being very patient in choosing their targets. And they sent a very loud message that if you're going to send in massive amounts of arms to escalate and continue this conflict, we will shut it off, and without any qualms whatsoever. I mean, my question is, what took them so long? And so that sent a very strong message to these hotheads and the Lindsey Grahams and the Marco Rubios and the Victoria Nulands that, you know, you want to keep, if you think you can control the narrative and the direction of this conflict, you better think twice, because as George and I say over and over again, the Russians don't bluff, they act.
Oh, sorry, I'll unmute myself. I want to say this before, and then I'll answer the question about where that increase is coming from. But the truth is, we don't, if it's a NATO installation, ladies and gentlemen, it is a military target. If it was a Warsaw Pact installation in Alberta and they were training Canadians, we would have struck it weeks ago. So, like, let's stop pretending like this is, you know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's like our actions are just and nobody else's is. And that drives me nuts when it comes to foreign policy, because there's no place for that analysis in sound foreign policy. There's just not. And then secondly, where is it coming from? Look, it's coming from certain conservatives. And I think Peter said it before. George, you said it. I think that a lot of people were just full of crap under Donald Trump. All of these so-called America First conversions, I think they were just full of crap. These conservative pundits, they're the same ones who beat the war chest, beat the war drums over Iraq. They claim to have seen the error of their ways under Donald Trump because they had licked their finger and they felt which way the wind was blowing with public opinion. And now they feel like, you know, they're going back. It took them no time at all to revert. Here's the danger for the Republican Party. Do you know where there wasn't much increase at all? Among independents. All right. Independents don't give a damn about what's going on in Ukraine. Where it came from was liberals who last month were a little bit more hesitant, you know, but now they feel like they have to. First of all, we drummed Russia is the devil in their brains for 4 years. So it was easy to convince them and appeal to them. They still believe the MSNBC pundits who are really nothing but U.S. intel officers who are now in the media. They believe all of those people. So I wasn't surprised to see an increase among liberals, but there was some increase in conservatives, and that no doubt has that is no doubt the reflection of these people that I was just referring to, who claim to be these Trump, supporting non-interventionists, right? And they hate that. I love that word. Somehow not being willing to entangle yourself in a foreign conflict is non-interventionist, or isolationist. Non-interventionist is probably the better word, actually. But isolationist is that other word that gets thrown around. But again, the danger for Republicans is going back to the Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Mitt Romney, the Bush foreign policy views that predated Donald Trump, because the third-party voters who really do swing quite a bit, and the independents who obviously are the majority swing vote in this country, they don't give a damn. What do they care about? Inflation, which leapt out in front of economy and jobs as the number one issue this month. It's probably what we ask about 12 different issues and give a place for other. And yet still, the inflation is going to be a huge plurality, not just, not a majority, but the lion's share. And I just want to read something real quick before I go here. I want to read this notable interview I shared with locals. It was an independent voter who voted for Joe Biden. He lives in the state of Georgia, suburban voter. He's male. Region obviously is the South, age 45 to 64. He's white, Italian ethnicity, education. He has an associate. He makes between $100,000 and $200,000. He's not a member of a union. He's a single man, but he does have one or more school-age children under 18. He's a little bit older of a dad, independent, and he does lean conservative ideologically, but he doesn't affiliate with any party. He voted in 2020. He voted in 2016, and he voted in other presidential elections before 2016. In 2022, he says he is 100% certain to vote. It will be his first midterm ever. He doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. He cares about the overall impression that America is collapsing and that we're about to use resources we again do not have abroad. He actually thought that Donald Trump was the war president in 2020. So yeah, I know a lot of people say, well, then he's an idiot. No, some people they're busy. We call it rational ignorance. They're not stupid. They're just busy trying to make a living, and the media lies to them. All right. So this guy is not, believe me, he's not dumb. This is a smart guy. All right. He just made the decision he thought was the best. And in all, to sum it up, he said, I love the United States of America, but this administration is a worthless pile of cat shit. I miss my mother and my grandmother every day, but I'm glad they don't have to be here to witness this. And he feels like we're going to, again, make another Iraq mistake, and for nothing. Meanwhile, the cost of gas is going to the moon. There are grocery stores missing stapled goods. That we have real serious problems in this country, and we're basically neutered as a superpower and ineffective because of our incompetent leaders. We're ineffective at being able to address these issues. And it hasn't always been like America could address these issues. That was something we were able to do. We would always able to rise over these major challenges that would sink any other nation state. But this generation, there's this feeling that we can't do that. And that scares the hell out of this guy who has children under the age of 18. Single dad. George, what do you make of that, George? I'll throw or Laura. Where am I supposed to go, George or Peter? Hop on in here, Laura. Tell me, I forgot.
George, go ahead, George.
All right, I'll be brief. I think it's very interesting what this voter that you interviewed said, and I think why this is a little more serious than previously, because here we have the Americans have got themselves into wars on a very consistent basis ever since 1945. And they were all disastrous, but each time they did so, it was always against much weaker opponents. So even if people were not happy about the wars, the public was never happy. The elites loved these wars. The military-industrial complex loved these wars. The people not so much. But the people could at least reassure themselves, well, we're fighting someone who can't really do much to hurt us. I mean, the North Vietnamese can't do much to hurt us. the Serbs can't do much to hurt us. Saddam Hussein can't do much to hurt us. So it doesn't really, it's not that painful. This time, this elite has made the cardinal mistake that previous generations had not made. You don't get yourself into a war with the Soviet Union and now with Russia. You don't do that. You pick your enemies. They're all much weaker than you are, and you can punch down, and then you're safe. However stupid the war is, at least you're safe. This time, they've made the cardinal error of not making sure that their opponent is a weakling. And that's why I think, they've really, really failed the American people, because they could well be just leading them into an absolute horrific catastrophe.
And
that's, Peter and Laura said it was technically your turn. I'm going to give you more time here. Go ahead, buddy.
No, I just want to add, George is saying it also what's in play right now, all of the conflicts that George mentioned, does that affect gas prices or the fact that you'll have Cheerios on in your grocery store? This time it does. Okay. Russia is a major energy player in the world. And so you can stop buying Russian oil. That's fine. 3.5% of America's daily consumption. You know what's happened? That oil just goes somewhere else. Somebody else buys it. Okay. So, and also, what happened, Europe is going to be the biggest loser in all of this besides Ukraine. They haven't thought through any of these sanctions. Joseph Borrell, apparently their genius foreign policy head, has even announced, we're done with sanctions. We don't have anything else to do. And it has not changed Russia's attitude whatsoever or its behavior. So they're admitting defeat. This is the first time an adventurous foreign policy since the Second World War will actually impact the average American and the average European. And these political elites don't understand that. They don't understand that at all. And it's going to be much to their peril. And particularly with the energy issue, they just haven't thought it out. You were mentioning that voter. Well, Russia is self-sufficient in food. Russia is self-sufficient in water. Russia has its own industrial base. Oh my God, McDonald's closed. Oh, the world trembles. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. And then a cosmetic chain closed their doors. Okay. I mean, are these people serious in Washington and London? Hey, these are inconveniences. But that's what it is, and it creates an enormous amount of resentment, okay? Because Russians will say, well, who sanctioned the United States after Iraq, okay? Who sanctioned the United States for illegally bombing Serbia? The double standard is so glaring here, and it just creates a lot of resentment, okay? And all this, see, one of the things, and I've talked about this at great length with George, is that the media atmosphere is very, very different. So when Lindsey Graham is talking about the assassination of Putin, they just put it on air. They give him some subtitles. They let him even use his own voice, because plenty of people now speak English in Russia. They'll just say, wow, they're calling for the assassination. They're calling for illegal regime change. That's the top of the news. They use American footage and politicians. That is the top headline here. Okay, and it's actually a really easy soft power thing to do. They don't even have to do the production of it. They just take it from YouTube. Okay, I mean, people here are very sophisticated, very, very smart, and they see the double standard. And like with Nord Stream 2, well, that was supposed to be a business thing. We were told over and over, it's a business thing, it's just a business thing, and then it's not. Okay, so Putin's public opinion numbers are going through the ceiling right now, and as George and I have said at great length, it's a lot of people here say, well, it's about time this happened, because the people of the Donbass were shelled for 8 years. Okay, you had this sniper tourism where Westerners would go into the Donbass with the help of Ukrainians to go to a village and start shooting people for fun. I mean, it's just grotesque. And so
yeah.
Come to an end.
Go ahead. No, I'm just saying we showed the images last week. I think that for many people, that may have been the first time they've ever seen these images or heard about them. And that's that. Like you said, it is a double standard. And if you go to other places of the world, you're going to hear a different point of view in the media as well. The problem, I think, here is that people aren't hearing any other point of view. And, for the first time, you just said about Russia's self-sufficiency in food, right? So when you hear some of these attacks, they may sound great, and people are like, yeah, damn right, but they don't understand the Russian economy. They don't understand how it's structured. So they don't know how ridiculous some of these things sound, as if they're going to have this enormous impact. All it's going to do is breed more resentment. Because again, it's like how conservatives at home feel about the FBI. Why is always this double standard, right? But you were the only one to say that, Peter, since Robert and I did What Are the Odds last week on Monday to try to explain to people the structure of the Russian economy. You would not have heard that anywhere else. You're going to hear it on Fox News. You're not going to hear it on CNN. You'll hear these ridiculous claims, that I'm going to cripple the Russian economy, Lindsey Graham said in that interview with Maria Bartiromo. How, Lindsey? How? We all, behind his back, you supported Joe Biden against Donald Trump. You ran all over the country and told Republican donors that it would be better if Donald Trump lost because he was going to do damage to the party's brand for a generation among black and brown people. Same thing with Tim Scott, right? But then also, that you really you wanted to placate the military-industrial complex. You wanted Joe Biden. You all did. So let's get real. So the only guy who really did anything to hurt the Russian economy has been removed, and all of his policies have been reversed. Having an energy competitor, a real energy competitor, would be a way to actually try to stick your finger in Putin's eye. But of course, that's gone now. And because people like Lindsey Graham, I mean, you got what you wanted, Lindsey, and now we imported 160 million barrels of oil last year. So, or billion, excuse me. So, it's like the things that actually matter, these idiots worked their butts off to make sure that would be reversed. Those things would be gone. I mean, he behind the scenes opposed the president. On Sean Hannity's show, he'd beg his supporters for money. Because he thought he had a real chance of losing South Carolina, that Senate seat. Not that Trump was in any danger of losing it, but he believed he was. He believed the Quinnipiac polls. He believed his own, the garbage. That guy, come on, guys, don't we remember this? This guy was like in tears on the Sean Hannity show, begging for money because he thought he was going to lose. Meanwhile, he's going to my friend's house, whose dad is a big donor, talking about, I know you don't understand, but believe me when I tell you. And I've heard this from probably a half a dozen other people. So it's not like these guys make these stories up. These are the guys who have senators in their homes because they give them money. And they'll tell them the truth of what they really believe before they'll tell Sean Hannity. And this guy worked his butt off to get rid of Donald Trump. Are you kidding me? And now all of a sudden, he wants to be tough on Russia with Joe Biden as if that was ever a plausible. This is to the point, and I got a ton of these. I don't want to keep showing them, but it makes me a bit nervous when our leaders are so stupid. They make these comments. I get nervous. Like, why is Peter the first one? And you, George, I know you know it too. Why are you the first people to come on the show outside of something Robert and I did in a presentation for 2 hours on What Are the Odds? Why is it this tiny handful of people know more clearly about the supposed enemy than the people who are supposed to be defending us from the enemy? It's just, and they're going to make these being stupid, or being this ignorant, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to give them, the benefit of the doubt, knock yourself out. It's dangerous to have people this dumb in power. It's dangerous. I really did, starting as of last week, listening to some of their talking guys, it dawned on me. No, they really are this dumb.
The benefit of the doubt at all. I do not do that. What? Watch all of the cable. All of these. What military person other than McGregor and Tulsi Gabbard? Where's their winning road record? When were they ever right about these foreign wars? Never. They've always been wrong, but they're right on. Come on, common sense tells you this. It doesn't make any sense. The war is going badly. How do you know? I mean, you told us everything was going great 20 years in Afghanistan.
Oh God. Yeah, the Afghan papers, George, absolutely destroy our credibility with assessing how conflicts are going abroad. And those are conflicts we're involved in. I mean, these are conflicts we're supposed to be directly involved in and have knowledge of. Yet they're supposed to be, their assessments are supposed to be credible when they don't even have their own people really there to tell the tale, which is why this month, George, we asked the question differently. Robert suggested it, and I liked it. And basically, this is how we read the question, and then I'll get your take on all of this. Do you support or oppose each U.S. military action against Russia, or are you unsure and have no opinion? And first, they were read a prompt basically saying, some people argue that we should declare, if Ukraine is losing the war against Russia, because we're already preempting this, right? If they're losing, do you think that the U.S. should declare war on Russia to defend Ukraine? And then the second one was simply, some people argue that we should enforce a no-fly zone, which is a bit of a joke anyway. It'd be NATO no-fly zone, but it is for people who don't understand the capability. But if we do, that almost assuredly would lead to Russia declaring war on the United States. Do you support or oppose each of the following? That's how we ask, because of course we know the next steps here. And I'm a little shocked to see the increase this month. It's again, though, remember, it's coming from like certain conservatives who believe these people, and then liberals who, honestly are just all about believing everything they hear on MSNBC. But what's your say? What say you, George?
Well, that's right. I mean, first of all, what's very important is that the public has no idea what a no-fly zone is, because it sounds great. No-fly zone. Oh yeah, that sounds a good idea. Then we don't have bomber aircraft overhead, and you can do all sorts of things. But when you try to explain to them what a no-fly zone is, which of course the media don't do, and that it is guaranteed to involve a shooting war with Russia, because that means you're going to be destroying Russian aircraft. But even before you destroy Russian aircraft, the Russians are going to hit all of your military installations. Then, of course, it's a little different. But I agree that it is shocking that there's still a high percentage. I think I saw that poll. I mean, it's still 38% think that we should go ahead and do it, even if it means a war with Russia. It just shows the level of delusion. I mean, moronic. I mean, I don't know whether, Rich, you've seen Dr. Strangelove, one of the great political movies of all time.
Oh, and yes.
Yeah, and there's that moment when that colonel who's in that aircraft who says, "Well, this is it, boys. Nuclear combat, toe to toe with the Ruskies." And that's the level at which I think that's it. We've reached a point. There's going to be nuclear combat, toe to toe with the Ruskies, without any notion of what the hell they're talking about. I mean, this is a problem that it's now 75 years since the end of World War II. There's very few people around who have any understanding of what actually took place in World War II, of what the two atomic bombs did to Japan. I mean, so they just think, hey, this is pretty cool. They've seen all these video games, and then we're gonna force down Putin. That's it. Putin's gonna crawl back to his lair. It's a measure of the absolute cretinism that has now pervaded American society. It comes from television, from video games, appalling education system. All of this eventually takes a toll.
George, before we get, we were talking about the popularity of Putin before, and 38%, that's probably where we're going to end up in our own polling, and which was a bit stunning to me. Now, strongly support that is not anywhere near strongly oppose. And sometimes, as was with COVID, as with the war in Iraq, as with myriad other examples, you have to be able to be politically smart. You have to not only be able to read what the polls are telling you right now, but you have to read inside those numbers, which is why we call it that show. And that's why the show is the name. Inside the numbers. It's why we call it this. Because smarter people, right, are not just looking at polls right now and what they say. You're looking at really politically shrewd people are looking at the numbers deep within and are asking themselves, what is it going to be 6 months from now? I understand public opinion can shift here and there with events, but ultimately, what do the numbers tell me about core belief systems in these voters and whether or not they'd have some great resolve to a conflict like this? And, bring up Dr. Strangelove. I was thinking the other day of this show that used to be on. It was called Deadliest Warrior. And I loved it because I'm a data nerd. And really, for all of the reenactments of what each warrior could do, it really came down to a model not unlike an election model that we authored, which is that there are different variables that go into potential outcomes. And, we run a simulation maybe 1,000 times. And how many times does this person win over this person? It was really, so I really thought it was cool. And there was a relevant one on Deadliest Warrior. It was a Spetsnaz versus a Green Beret. And because of some of the personality differences of the Spetsnaz, and because of some of the I don't know how else to put it, but the U.S. military's got great stuff. Don't get me wrong. And they're fine people. A lot of these, look, I joined the Army as an 18 X-ray, so it gives me no pleasure to say this. I went through the 18 X-ray pipeline. But basically, the Spetsnaz won. And the Spetsnaz won because the Army the U.S. Army put more emphasis on developing certain other aspects, right? So in the end, a blade that a Spetsnaz has is superior to, an E-tool, something like that, right? And I was really damning to see it, but it kind of made sense to me a little bit because, it's like a 12-on-12 kind of fight, because that's how it is. Normally, Deadliest Warrior would be like a hoplite versus a samurai soldier, or something like a hoplite Greek soldier versus samurai. In the end, the Russians had more resolve. And I wonder, looking at this from a political science point of view, 38% say that now. What about when we incur 30,000 casualties? Where will those polls go after we take heavy losses? We had no resolve against like sandal wearing goat herders. And we're going to, and by the way, the Taliban, they used to say this all the time. And for people who don't know, any U.S. soldier who served knows what I'm about to say is true. They would always just laugh. You try to interrogate them, try to get information. You have the watches, we have the time. That's what they would say. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, by the way, he thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He said, you have no chance. Go ahead, go invade. You have no chance because you have a part of your society that doesn't have the resolve we have. And sadly, sometimes you got to be strong enough to admit your weaknesses, right? And I see 38% now. I see single digits after 30,000 casualties, ladies and gentlemen. I wonder where the Russian people would be, George, after they took 30,000 casualties. Who would be able to suffer more at this point? You're talking about people who, like the Battle of Stalingrad, for crying out loud. I mean, who has changed more since the days of total war in the Second Great War? Like whose national identity has grown, is still stoic, and whose is not, right? So I look, I don't like saying this. It's just being absolutely truthful. We've started to rely too much on our technology, and we haven't fought a great war in a long time. So while I see 38%, 40% saying, yeah, let's do it, I don't see that 40% lasting very long once something happens. And sometimes if you want to be shrewd, you got to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I know you're absolutely right. And we've seen evidence of this, that even when we're talking about much smaller scale wars, there was always enthusiasm in the beginning. I mean, people forget that the Vietnam War was very, very popular for a long time. I mean, it was the debacle of the Tet Offensive, or at least how the media presented the Tet Offensive, that caused public opinion to change on Vietnam. And of course, Iraq invasion was very popular. Yeah, there were big demonstrations against it, but generally it was popular. The attack on Afghanistan, very, very popular. So, but this time you've got a real serious adversary. And then once you start hitting Russian territory, and then the Russians retaliate, and they'll probably hold off hitting American territory, but they may not hold off for very long before they start hitting American territory. I mean, what the American public is going to change very, very quickly, and they are going to turn with a fury and a vengeance against all the Lindsey Grahams and the Mitt Romneys.
That's right, man.
Into this crazy, absolutely demented notion, and suddenly there'll be great pressure. We need to talk now, immediately. Whatever Putin wants in Ukraine, give it to him. We need to bring this to an end now. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. This 38% is going to collapse very quickly.
Yeah, and George, this is, I mean, we have seen evidence, Peter. George is 100%. And I don't, I, I hate to say this, but I hate citing other people's polls as well. But just last week, a poll came out that basically said that a certain segment of the population, the Democratic Party, seemed to be the most likely to support, fighting Russia over Ukraine. And yet they were the least likely to be personally willing to do that fight, which is why commenter in the discussion is 100% correct. We seem very willing to throw other people out there, gentlemen, and or at least a part of the population does. But once those casualties start rolling in, they basically look. Joe Biden is one of them. Joe Biden voted for the war in Iraq, but the minute the winds changed, and anyone who was there at this moment, the military was in bad need of congressional funding to be increased if they wanted us to do the job that they entrusted us and tasked us to do. And yet, because the political winds shifted, people like Joe Biden, people like Nancy Pelosi, these very same people, they bailed. They cut tail and they bailed because they didn't want to be a pro-Iraq war vote. And they knew that they could run whoever their candidate was in 08 against a Republican warmonger. And they would be able to run on exiting Iraq with dignity. So they began to make these really shameful votes, which is you sent these people there, and now you won't supply them with what they need. So again, if somebody has that poll, they want to share it in the thing, knock yourself out. But what it basically showed was that those who were the most willing to send people overseas are the least willing to fight themselves. And ladies and gentlemen, that is not sound. That is not a good thing to go into a great power conflict with. If that's the way your population is, it's like so much for latent power, Peter. So much for latent power, right? Speaking of smart people, so much for latent power. The hell? Oh, it was the great tragedy of great power politics.
What? So this percentage of people that are willing to go toe to toe, as George mentioned here with the Russians.
Yeah.
Why? What is their rationale? Is because to protect Ukraine's democracy? Is that why? Because we keep hearing that. Well, that's a sham. I mean, it's a complete sham. It's a kleptocracy. Ask Hunter Biden, okay? And other children of members of Congress that have been carpetbaggers in Ukraine. It's anything but a democracy. After the forced regime change in February of 2014, two of the biggest parties in the country, the Party of the Regions and the Communist Party, they were dissolved. They were banned. That part of the political spectrum was banned, and it was completely controlled by what the Ukrainians call the Western ambassadors that are calling the shots. Okay, so it has nothing to do with democracy. And one of the things that George and I have talked at great length about is that where's all of this aid money from the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union, the United States? Where's it all gone? There's no accountability for it. Now you want to send arms there. Well, they'll sell those too, okay? I mean, the nature and the description of the regime in Ukraine is so out of whack. People have no idea. That these poor, struggling Ukrainians fighting, for freedom and democracy. Well, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. And so I find it so troubling that people be willing to cause the worst possible military conflict over a myth that they've been spoon-fed by the media.
Yeah, it is a Quinnipiac poll for everybody who wants to know, and I'll try to pull it up here. But basically, in a nutshell, if the roles were reversed, right? So they are the most willing to want to fight Russia. Yet, if there was a fight here, let me phrase this correctly, right? So if we were in a position like the Ukrainians would in, 40% of Democrats would cut and run. That's what Quinnipiac found. So they wouldn't even be willing to defend their own homeland. You understand what I'm saying to you? So they want to get us into a fight with Russia over Ukraine, but they would not be willing to even fight for their homeland if a similar situation that the Ukrainians in presented themselves to us. So as what George just said is why I'm going to throw it to George. You said it in your last comment, George, and I want you to I want your thoughts on this. But you basically said, forget about the 30,000 casualties overseas. What about when Russia strikes a target here? What if they were to launch a strike in this hemisphere? Then Quinnipiac's not a right-leaning poll, George. It's not a right-leaning poll.
Right.
And it's basically saying half the Democratic Party would cut and run. They'd run.
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating poll because it reveals the thinking of the Democratic Party. Because when they think about America, they think, well, this is a pretty shitty country. It's racist, it's sexist, or homophobic, Islamophobic. It's built on the killing of the indigenous people. Everything imaginable. That's negative, they will say about America. So yeah, of course I'm not going to fight for America. Why should I fight for anything as crappy as this country? But they're willing to fight for something else like Ukraine. I mean, that they're willing to do. It's because, well, at least it's Ukraine. At least it's not the United States. And of course, it's that's why these politicians are so bizarre. And I think that's why Tucker Carlson kind of put it very well. But when I listen to President Biden, it sounds like he's the president of Ukraine. It doesn't sound like he's the president of the United States, because he obviously cares a lot more about Ukraine than he does about the United States. And that, I think, is true also about these people who, these Democrats, that they'll care about Ukraine. They will care about the horror of the Russians, but they're not prepared to do anything about America and to improve life for Americans. We talked obviously about the border or anything like that. Well, no, because of course America is a racist. It's an SS-hole country. So it's a complete bizarre reflection of the bizarre thinking that pervades particularly among Democrats.
Yeah, and let me read it so everybody. And I gave the link to everybody in the various chats that are watching. What would Americans do? As the world witnesses what is happening in Ukraine, Americans were asked what they would do if they were in the same position as Ukrainians are now. Stay and fight or leave the country, okay? It would basically, ladies and gentlemen, be Republicans and a vast majority of Republicans and a majority of independents fighting to defend the country, while Democrats by majority cut and run. All right. I mean, it's a poll. This is what this is. And it's not a right-leaning poll. This is Quinnipiac, one of the worst, most left-leaning pollsters and metro-leaning answers and respondents that there is. And if they thought to ask this first, and I give Tim Malloy and the rest of them credit on this, I wish I would have thought to ask this question, though. I bet you a lot of Democrats would have called me the fake pollster and this and that, and they wouldn't have believed it. But here it is. A majority, 55% overall, say they would stay and fight. 38% say they would leave the country. Republicans said 68-25, and independents said 57-36 that they would stay and fight. Democrats, 52-40 majority, say they would leave the country. When we polled this weekend, and I'm looking at who supports this, who doesn't, I'm a little bit surprised at the number of liberals, but I guess, it is what it is. But what I want to bring something up and talk to Peter about it. But it definitely Democrats are more solidified behind this idea, without a doubt, that, they've been drummed that Russia is the bad guy. So you have still only about 25% strongly support the no-fly zone, but you have somewhat support 28.3 among Democrats in the raw. And Democrats slightly more than others to support all-out declaration of war. They're the most likely to support an all-out declaration of war, yet they wouldn't even fight for their homeland. George, this is, or Peter, I guess I'm going to Peter, right? Peter, interestingly, Donald Trump, I don't know how it's going to be when the final weights are, but in the raw, Donald Trump was outperforming the generic Republican this month, which to me was like, wow, wait a second. All right, because Republicans have had some pretty big generic ballot leads. I think we're reaching a critical point here for Republicans where they have to decide whether they're going to tell these new voters that they are who they say they are, or they're going to prove that they're not, and they're going to risk losing these votes. Because when I looked at who is this, right, you have this like 15, 17% of liberals who say, no, I'm a real liberal and I don't support this. I'd rather vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. I look at how many of those are voting for a generic Republican, and it's in the mid high single digits. So he is almost more than doubling what the generic Republican is doing on liberals. And I'm thinking, this is crazy to me. They hate Donald Trump. But then I think about somebody like Tim Pool, and I think of somebody like Matt Taibbi, Aaron Mate, right? And yeah, they don't like Donald Trump. But if it was a choice between a war with Russia or the peace dividend, I'm going with the peace dividend. You know, I mean, so I really see some real danger here, Peter. I do. I see some real danger that Republicans are going to blow this, man. But that's what they do, isn't it, Peter? Isn't it what they do?
That's what they do best. That's what they always do best. Okay, as George and I have said in the Gaggle many, many times, they're afraid of power. They're afraid to use power. Okay, they like being on the defense. Okay, because you know they just keep their fundraising. Okay, that's what they're mostly interested in is fundraising. They're not interested in policy. But you know, one of the things I wanted to say earlier, in reference to your question, is that I really find it very humorous to watch people like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham tie themselves into pretzels because no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, but everything else, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And one of the things is that George and I talked about at great length is that Tucker Carlson doesn't pander to anyone particularly, and he gives his opinion. But Laura and Hannity are pandering, desperately pandering to maintain the Trump base, and they're doing a really terrible job of it. George, I think we talked about this last week that in the course of 3 days, Laura Ingraham covered every single angle with no conviction whatsoever, and then Hannity, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, but somehow there should be a no-fly zone, but somebody else should do it, and they won't know we did it. I mean, it sounded like listening to a kindergartner. Okay, so I think the Republican Party is in absolute dire straits because you have Little Marco and you have Lindsey Graham and people like that. They're going what should be a blowout. And of course, inflation is Putin's fault. Okay, supply chain problem, it's Putin's fault. If they continue with their rhetoric like this, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, why should we support the Republicans? They're too soft on Russia. They're allowing themselves to be bulldozed again, and it's their fault. If the average voter could just watch this podcast, okay, I think we could flip a lot of people because we're not hysterical, we're not extremists, we're being very pragmatic and talking about geopolitics. Geopolitics is not about liking or disliking, it's understanding power. I can't hear you, George.
Sorry about that. Trump voters, just for the person in the chat, Trump voters are more than statistically less likely to support any of this. So, and again, it's like, where is it coming from? And it's if there was going to be an election, George, in the future, well, I can tell from the base, Trump has the base locked up on his end. He would lose those people who are saying they'll vote for him because they don't want this. And this is what it's just completely backwards, going to what Peter said, if an average person, which one would they agree with? It's because there are so many, the core assumptions made in each argument are so different from each other. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, isn't it, George?
No, that's right. Because the key to winning elections in the United States is to promise peace. You don't win elections by promising war. No one's going to vote for somebody who's promising war, and particularly not war against a nuclear superpower. It's absolutely insane for the Republicans to walk into this trap of promising voters that they're going to get tough with Putin, and risking an attack on the American mainland. And that Americans, I think, understand that is nuts, because now they're making Biden look reasonable. And Biden is not reasonable. Biden is the one who actually brought this crisis about. I mean, it was his disastrous policies that led to the crisis in Ukraine. But now, if Biden says, well, I don't think no-fly zone is a great idea, and we're not going to fight World War III over Ukraine, then voters say, well, hey, that sounds reasonable. A hell of a lot more reasonable than Republicans promising them World War III. It is absolutely suicidal what the Republicans are doing. And Trump, this should have been an absolute, gimme for him. He should have just been walking away and say, hey, Putin's got reasonable issues. Russia has reasonable security issues. If I were president, I would sit down with Putin and we'd work out some kind of a security agreement. We keep Russia happy, it keep us happy, and then we have to work something out over Ukraine. Trump could do that, but instead, again, Trump seems to be all over the place, and I think he's really hurting his brand.
Yeah, Peter, why the hell do you think he's doing this, Peter? I mean, you already have more than 60% of the country believes that if Donald Trump was still president, none of this would even be happening. And it's not because they think Donald Trump will go to war. It's because they think that Donald Trump would make it clear before war that this is what you would face. Like, I'm a little different guy here. I'm a different kind of person. So I'm not going to play this like symmetrical game with you, like the best and the brightest in the Kennedy administration, brought to the table, which we've been continuously doing stupidly for decades. He's asymmetrical, and they kind of fear, that one sneeze in the wrong direction, and Donald Trump will flip the switch. So he doesn't have to do this. The man who won in 2016, let me just be clear before I throw it to you, Peter. There's a reason why Donald Trump won the Rust Belt and no other Republican could do so since the 80s. You are not winning the state of Pennsylvania or the state of Michigan as a Republican by promising to get into a conflict. They didn't believe Joe Biden would get them into a conflict. I will pull up the damn results for people who don't remember. We talked about them on the show. We asked, who do you think is more likely to start a conflict? In states like Minnesota, it was overwhelmingly Joe Biden. Donald Trump will do it because of the crap the media fed them. Donald Trump is helping that narrative by doing what he's doing right now. He's helping it, Peter. Why? What is he doing?
It's almost impossible to answer that question, because I saw the interview that he had with Hannity, and George and I, we both watched it, and the conclusion that both of us drew was that he doesn't seem to be very well informed about what's going on. It was extremely disconcerting, because he was just all over the place about being a tough guy. This wouldn't have happened under my watch and all of this. Okay, we would have expected that. But then, then he just started kind of in a very mild way, casual way, of repeating the narrative that the Hannitys and the Lauras all the way to MSNBC to CNN. So I found his reasoning to be very, very muddled. And I don't know. I just didn't think he gave it a whole lot of thought, to be honest.
Peter, after the Syria thing, which somebody brought up in the chat, you would think at this point, everything he is told, he would be very hesitant to believe. So he got a lot of people think he got duped in Syria. I actually tend to believe he just used Syria to scare the hell out of Xi Jinping, because I know the kind of backstory. He was, when he ordered those strikes, he was actually talking with Xi about the trade and all of the stuff. So he was like, having dessert with the man. It was like, I just lobbed a few missiles at Bashar al-Assad, and he's like, she was like choking on his cake. Like, what? What did you just say? And he's like, yeah, I just bombed the hell out of him. I just figured I had to pull the trigger on that one. He was, kind of doing these things to like make people think maybe I'll deal with you in a similar fashion. But again, it's almost as if there wasn't a whistleblower report in Syria. It's almost as if, George, like, people don't understand what these people are capable of, what they're capable of to get their way. All right. So I fear this deference to authority, that's really inherently anti-American. This country was found on a very strong and healthy suspicion of anyone in an position of authority. It was found on like realist principles of human nature. Morgenthau kind of like to the bone. And yet there are so many who just refuse to believe this. as if there wasn't a Gulf of Tonkin event, WMD event, Syria chemical weapon event. We could just go on and on. Do I have to play the babies in the incubator thing again for everybody? I feel like I need to play this 30 seconds, George, every damn show, because it's like every day we hear their bullcrap. So every day you have to counter it. So I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to throw it to you when we come back.
And we finally call on Naira to testify.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Naira, and I just came out of Kuwait. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
George, was that true?
A young woman was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. The whole thing was a setup by Hill and Knowlton, a kind of a leading public relations firm in the United States, that was then deployed to the war in Yugoslavia, in Croatia, and then Bosnia-Herzegovina, where again they played the same routine. Oh, there's horrors, civilians. Everything was always only targeting civilians. So this is a long-standing principle, which is, they're only targeting civilians, which you can actually see also in the way that the media are presenting the war in Ukraine at the moment. If you read, anytime, you go to the New York Times webpage, every single story is about the civilians. Again, Russia targeting civilians. Apartment building destroyed by the Russians. Of course, they don't pay any attention to the civilians that are being targeted by the Ukrainian army. Just today, 20 civilians were killed in the Donetsk, but of course that doesn't make it to the New York Times. It's worthy and unworthy victims. So the people in the Donbass, they're unworthy victims, so they're not worthy of being writing about. Whereas the people in Kiev, they are worthy to write about. But going back to your question about Trump, Trump did have some skeptical instincts whereby he didn't believe the crap that the intelligence services were telling him, but he kind of he suppressed his own skepticism. So when the CIA chief Gina Haspel, she told him about, that poisoning of the Skripals, the ducks, the ducks ate some bread that was poisoned, and so all these ducks died. And that Trump went crazy. My God, the Russians, they're killing ducks now. And he signed off on expelling, I think, 23 Russian diplomats. Later on, it turned out that the whole thing was an absolute lie. There were no ducks hurt at all in the Skripal's alleged poisoning. But she knew how to manipulate Trump. And you'd think what Trump would, by and large, could become a bit skeptical about what the CIA was telling him. But with him, unless it's something to do directly with him personally, such as when the intelligence services were telling him about, Russia really interfered in the election. They were really very big. He didn't like that. That he was skeptical about, because he wants to say, hey, I won the election fair and square, so I'm not going to believe that the Russians interfered in the election. But anything else, he's ready to buy into. And I don't know about whether the thing with the Syria, whether it was about Xi Jinping, or whether he wanted to show that Trump, was ready to bomb Syria, whereas Obama, who put down the red line, wasn't prepared to bomb Syria. So, hey, he's cocking a snook at the expense of Obama. But the problem is that, any president, what you said about authoritarian, any president should be extremely skeptical of what the intelligence services are telling him. Because they have their agenda, and they're always trying to manipulate the political leaders into fulfilling their agenda. And unfortunately, Trump just didn't have any consistent position on this.
Yeah, I want both of your opinions on this. It was a question from one of the viewers. What do you guys think about Israel's position here? It's interesting, that the Israelis are basically like, what? They should maybe consider this. What I'll go to you first, Peter. What do you make of that? they're in a position where there's another Democratic president. They know that means they're walking on thin ice or walking on eggshells when it comes to their relations with the U.S. Every time there's a Democrat in the office, Israel has to watch its back. So I feel like maybe some of this is, sadly, that, they had Trump for 4 years. They loved him. I mean, they're literally building neighborhoods named after the man. But they're now back in this position. So does that have a role to play in what their thought process is here? What do you think, Peter? I'll go to you first, buddy.
I think it's very interesting, the Israeli angle in all this, because obviously it is a Democratic administration, and the Israeli political elite has shown its allegiance to the GOP. But what Bennett did, the prime minister, I think it was very interesting and actually quite clever, because he kind of took it upon himself to break the bad news to the West, to the Western power, to NATO, saying, this war is going to end very, very soon. There's an obvious winner. And we, through the good services of the Israeli diplomatic corps, we can be the forum to be a broker, because Israel has good relations with Ukraine, has good relations with Russia, good relations with the EU, United States, etc. And then when, basically they were, saying, you should really, telling Zelensky, you really should kind of fold. Washington got wind of it, and the Israelis quickly changed their story, probably wishing they'd never gotten involved in it. But I mean, Bennett was actually quite clever. I mean, the jig is up. I mean, why escalate this thing? The outcome is going to be the same, just more dead people. So it was a very interesting gambit. Yeah. And plus, at the United Nations, the Israelis were not very diplomatic in dealing with condemning Russia. So I think the Israelis wanted to get back on the international stage and kind of tweak their position. It all came to naught, but I mean, it was a kind of an interesting nuance that we all saw play. But he broke the bad news to Zelensky, but Victoria Nuland doesn't want any bad news. Okay, she wants to keep this going.
Yeah, George, you have something to add to that, because throw it to you. You got something to add to it, but also, Peter just said something there. I mean, really, I don't know what their end game is here. Lindsey Graham, you hear him say it. The end game is Putin's assassination and his removal. Is that really reality, George? I mean, what the hell are these people talking about?
Well, you're absolutely right, because when you listen to people like Graham, and of course, when you go to the United Kingdom with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who just keep talking about escalating this war against Russia, then you have to, what's the end game here? There's no way Ukraine can win this war. The only option that you have is getting involved yourself, and that is, of course, to say the least, a very, very dubious outcome. But you have to say, what is the end game here? Whereas Bennett made the common sense point, which is, look, you cannot win this war. You just don't have the military capabilities, and Russia has the will to win this. Russia is not going to allow itself to lose this war. I mean, that, it says, I know the Russians, because of course, there are many, many Russian Jews in Israel, so they know the mentality of them. And so that's why he said, look, if you take the deal now, you're not going to do badly. The longer this goes on, you're going to lose in the end anyway, and the Russians are going to offer you much worse terms. Because at the end of it, you're probably going to lose your entire coastline, the Black Sea coastline. I mean, you're already going to lose the Sea of Azov coastline, but now you're going to lose the Black Sea coastline. You're going to be landlocked. That's the end game here. So why keep this going? That's a common sense view. This isn't coming from Britain. Britain should be saying this to Zelensky, but they're not. They just keep escalating for the sake of it. But I think it's true what Peter said. Israel has good relations with Russia. It needs Russia, I think, as a buffer with Iran. Israel is very worried about Iran, and so it needs kind of Russian mediation there. And I think that's why Bennett, got himself involved. But of course, that's the Americans then got wind of it and said, no, out, butt out. Let's keep this war going. Yeah, that's a great policy.
Yeah, George. So it's what Peter said then. I mean, in the end, it's really just about more dead people then. I mean, so the only thing that's worth considering is how many more have to die before before we get there anyway. And then if it does go on and you know, and it continues and continues, the Russians are not going to offer what they have offered up until this point. And you know, since I was on your show last, something else really has happened and transpired through all this, which is something we talked about on your show that you know, we were expressing concern about. The UN vote, we lost it, and you know, India joined with China. You know, so I can't explain to people the importance of that. I mean, a year ago, 2 years ago, we absolutely would have been able to count on them, and we can't now, obviously. So we were on your show worrying about this balancing coalition that would develop against this NATO alliance. The Brits, all these people talk so damn big, Peter. They have nothing to back it up. They have nothing to back it up. So when everyone in America should understand, when they talk about NATO enforcement, when they talk about NATO engaging, that's you, man. That's you. Because there is no significant great power in NATO outside of the US anymore. The French are weak. The Germans have nothing. That's part of the World War II, post World War II structure. Are you aware they do not have a giant, you know, standing army like they once did in the 20th century? I mean, do people understand this? Japan has no. It's not NATO, but it's another post World War II ally. We defend Japan. That's the deal. You don't militarize, and we'll defend you. They have nothing. The Brits. I mean, Jesus. I mean, guys, they're not exactly the empire who once owned the East India Trading Company. You know, I mean, they're not even a great naval power anymore. I mean, there is nothing to back up this talk. And the last time I was on your show, all of us were like, what is this? You know, that who's going to balance against NATO when all this is said and done? And so far, it's shaping up to three very big, great powers against the U.S. being baited and bled by their allies, which is all this is. You know, they jumped on our bandwagon, and they have nothing really to bring to the table except for geography. That's all they have is geography, guys. They have no actual force to impose those fronts, to defend those fronts. They're just a matter of geography for us, and they don't even have latent power. So forget about economic and military. Their latent power is probably, if somebody pulled the United Kingdom, it'd be probably even far worse than the United States, as far as all the numbers we were just talking about. I mean, Peter, this is sadly playing out how we thought it would a month ago.
Well, I mean, what people don't realize, George and I are a little bit older. You know, NATO was always this, you know, Eurocentric organization post World War II to face off the Warsaw Pact. You know, we didn't think about it very much. It wasn't that important. But since the end of the Cold War, it's been, the more they talk it up, the less there really is to really talk about in reality. NATO has no real military assets. It doesn't. Yep. Okay, it's they have some air defenses, yes, but they're directed against Russia. Okay, that was always their point. But I mean, NATO has failed because they always promise what is happening now never would happen. That's why you joined the alliance. But because you joined the alliance and you want to expand the alliance, your worst nightmare comes true. So this is a NATO engineered failure. This is what has happened. Look what happened with the Treaty of Versailles. It created a unstable Europe. The major powers, France and in the UK, made security guarantees to the new Eastern European states, but they couldn't honor those guarantees. And on top of it, the Versailles Agreement was designed with the exclusion of what would become the Soviet Union. Okay, so now we have another repeat. NATO tried to refigure itself, not only without Russia, but against Russia. That is a losing proposition, and Ukraine is in the crossfires, wires. And this was George and I, we've talked about this till we're blue in the face, okay? It's so frustrating that this was a failed security architecture, and we're seeing it in real time.
You know, George, I want to, wow, you really led up into this because people on Locals, you're going to know this. Somebody had shared it on Locals with me after talking about his book. So, and you and I, of the three of us, spoke about this last time on your show. And since then, Isaac at the New York Post, Isaac Chotiner, right, obviously did not go into this interview well educated on the topic at all because some of his questions were ridiculous. But I want to read the entirety of the first answer to the first question, and then part of the second question, which really just Peter just nailed, and then get your take on it, George, because the bottom line is this was NATO engineered. You can pretend it wasn't until you're blue in the face, but it is. And if there's any one event, I'm not sure I agree here with Professor Mearsheimer on the one event, because I think it actually, you could say this predates this event, but it definitely was the event where Russia said, this is it. This is our line. I understand, you guys won the Cold War. I understand you're keeping NATO. We see it as a threat, but we'll live with it unless you cross this line. And you do, then we're going to have to respond. This is where you laid it out for us. That's great. Now we can lay out to you what is unacceptable and what we consider a vital security threat. And then any action after that, don't pretend like you're surprised. And they did it. And then the U.S. never hears this, the voters of the U.S., they never hear this. But I want to read this because it's important, okay? Looking at the situation, looking at the situation now with Russia and Ukraine, how do you think the world got here? And John Mearsheimer responds and says, I think all the trouble in this case really started in April of 2008. And again, I kind of dispute that, George, but I don't know, not dispute it. I'm just saying I think I can make an argument it started earlier, but this is definitely the event where the lines were drawn and it led to where we are here. But in April of 2008, at the NATO summit in Bucharest, where afterward NATO issued a statement that said Ukraine and Georgia would become part of NATO. So all those people like Brit Hume out there, all right, who say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. That is the deal. You're a fool. And you should stop commenting on a topic you know nothing about. All right. The Russians made it unequivocally clear at the time that they viewed this as an existential threat, and they drew a line in the sand. Nevertheless, what happened with the passage of time is that we have moved forward to include Ukraine in the West, to make Ukraine a Western bulwark. And even if they're not NATO, they're still a Western bulwark. They are on Russia's border. Of course, this includes more than just NATO expansion. NATO expansion is the heart of the strategy, but it includes EU expansion as well. And it includes turning Ukraine into a pro-American liberal democracy. And from a Russian perspective, this is an existential threat. And he says, well, I don't have any faith. Isaac, returns and says, I don't really have any faith in the U.S. creating a pro-democracy, right? I mean, but, in the end, what if Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, want to live in a pro-American liberal democracy? And Mearsheimer said back, if Ukraine becomes a pro-American liberal democracy and a member of NATO and a member of the EU, the Russians will consider that categorically unacceptable. If there was no NATO expansion and no EU expansion, and Ukraine just became a liberal democracy and was friendly with the US and the West, more generally, you'd probably get away with it. You want to understand that there is a three-pronged strategy at play here: EU expansion, NATO expansion, and turning Ukraine into a pro-American liberal democracy. And George, I want to get your comment on that, because it really just does seem that some of these schmucks cannot understand this or get this through their thick skulls.
Yeah, I think so. I don't wholly go along with Mearsheimer. The issue isn't that it's a pro-American liberal democracy.
That's right.
The issue is that it's a deeply anti-Russian beachhead for NATO, and that's what the United States has been doing. They've been turning Ukraine into this front in a war against Russia. As for EU membership, I think that's way down in the road. I don't think that's something that the Russians are even thinking about right now. What they are concerned with, and have been for a while, is that it's going to be essentially a state created for the purpose of being anti-Russia. And that's what the Americans have been doing. See, what the Russians now look upon the West as being united in hatred for Russia. And now they look in history and say, well, when else has this happened, when we had a European continent that is just driven by hatred? Well, obviously, it was when it was led by Hitler. And of course, there was, the case of Napoleon, but particularly Hitler. And therefore, when Putin says, and he said it on February the 24th, or maybe a couple of days earlier, when he said that we don't have the right to leave our country as undefended as it was in June 1941. In other words, we owe it to our generations that came before and the generations that come afterward to make sure that no one can ever do to us what they did in June of 1941. That's addressing the Russians' feelings. And so when people just thought, oh, well, look at, if you're Russia, Russia's got this border with China and Russia's all over, NATO is just a very small thing here to the west of the country. How can it possibly be a security threat? Yes, but all of the invasions of Russia that have taken place in the last couple of 100 years have all come from the West. They don't have a problem with China. They don't have a problem with India. They don't have a problem with Iran, with Pakistan, with Africa, with the Arab world, with Latin America. The only people they have a problem with is the West. And that's why
what a great point.
Having NATO here to the West is a serious issue for them.
What a great point. I mean, really, yeah, Peter, you want to add to that? Go ahead.
I just want to make it clear, just absolutely agree with George.
100%. Yep.
Absolutely agreeing with George. The Russians don't care about the nature of the regime in Kiev. It doesn't. They don't care who's president there. All they care about is that Ukraine is not used as a conduit for this anti-Russian coalition that George was speaking about. They don't care if it's Yanukovych or Poroshenko, Zelensky. It doesn't make any difference to them. That's the problem for Ukraine, okay? That's Ukraine's problem. But if they're going to be a bulwark against Russia, then they have a problem. It's not the nature of the regime. It's the nature of the threat.
Oh, wow. Another great way to put it. And that's the real term there. That's key that Schamer brings up. It's going to be a Western bulwark. And you simply can't have that kind of threat on your border. The only other incursion from the East, the Japanese, I mean, they're in an alliance with us right now. But George nailed it when it comes to the history. And it's not just the history of their threats. It's the history of how we have behaved when we have used this rhetoric in the past. And if you're them, are you thinking they're going to tolerate us? I mean, it's just not going to happen, which brings up Laura discussing in chat rooms with people, which is when this turned into this like straw man, Russia's the devil, Putin's the devil, or Russia is hell and Putin is the devil himself. Under Barack Obama, ladies and gentlemen, Russia was perfectly okay to deal with. But it was Barack Obama when he said to Medvedev, tell Vladimir Putin I on one last election, and then that's it. And Medvedev said, I'll transmit this to Vladimir. He was talking about the removal of the missiles on their western border, or our eastern front. That is, nobody wanted to bring that up. No media wanted to actually pry into that because, of course, there were water carriers. Even before that, you can remember Hillary Clinton, the absolute moron with her reset button. Okay. So it was fine. And that brings the question, which George, I want you to address, and then I'll throw it to Peter. Same question. What changed? What changed? How did it all of a sudden become the scapegoat for everything? And I think a lot of people in the chat are onto it, George. They're basically saying, that they are being used to, cover up our failings at home, and in NATO. So good, address that, George, because under Barack Obama is perfectly fine. Under Donald Trump, it became a crime to speak to a Russian, basically. Ask Michael Flynn.
No, I actually don't think it was really that great under Obama, because
but the rhetoric, though,
Yeah, right? I mean, remember they came in with the whole thing about, we're going to, what was the word? Rethink or recast or whatever the term that the Obama
reset,
the Russian reset. Yeah. The Russian reset, yeah. But that never really happened. If we think of all of the sort of events For instance, the Snowden thing, when the Russians granted asylum to Snowden, that infuriated Obama. Obama sent that clown, cretin, idiot, Michael McFaul as an ambassador to Russia. It was a catastrophe. Russians really didn't appreciate somebody like that as an ambassador. Then there was a case of Syria, where Obama basically got himself into a lot of trouble. He was planning on bombing Syria, and then the British pulled the rug from under him. And to save Obama's face, Putin came in with the proposal to disarm Syria of chemical weapons, and that would have been a face saver. And instead of Obama saying thank you for saving me, Obama repaid him by getting involved with Ukraine and engineering that coup in Maidan. So, and then of course there was the whole thing that was cooked up by the Obama people, and then Obama really gave it a lot of oxygen, which was the claim that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. So by the time Obama departed, the Russians really hated him more than they hated any other recent president. Even George W. Bush or Bill Clinton, they had some respect for. They had no respect for Obama. He's the one president they always speak very, very badly about. I think that by the time Trump came in, I think the political culture in the United States was now dead set against Russia, and the Europeans just simply followed it. I mean, Europeans always just simply follow whatever goes on in the United States.
Peter, before I toss it to you, is a perfect example of what we talked about last week, and we've been talking about for weeks. This idea that foreign policy is driven by moralism is totally ridiculous. Americans don't like the language of realpolitik, so foreign policy elites couch that rhetoric in terms of idealism and moralism. And that is nonsense. The Russian reset is a perfect example. In the end, we both were still operating with our core national security interests at heart, was at least what we believed to be our national security interests. And I'm with George 100%. It may have sounded like it, but that's public rhetoric. That is not the same as what really drives foreign policy. And in the end, it wasn't great. In the end, it is that event. You could, like, if you want to go back to 2008, fine. I just see it. I saw things leading up to that way before 2008. I mean, once the West decided to want to manage the decline of the Soviet Union and then have a say in how it was going to be reinstituted, that was going to be a problem. People were just never going to accept that. And then the refusal to disband NATO. I mean, when you have a balancing coalition that exists and the loser loses, and that coalition does not go away, then others, if it wasn't going to be Russia, it would have been China. And China does view NATO expansion as a threat, by the way. So it's this idea that it's only Russia does not explain. And the Chinese have the ultimate goal in mind. And believe me, NATO is not part of their vision. So, let's throw it to you, though, Peter. Great points by George. Great points.
George just steals all my points.
He knocked it out of the park on that. And the one before, too, let me tell you.
I think there's also another element that's really important here. And it's Russia has been able, it has the foresight and the assets and the wherewithal to push back against American hegemony. And this infuriates the political class in the United States and in London. Russia can say no. Another element that George and I have talked about frequently is that Russia is a fundamentally conservative country. It has no interest in this wokeism, this postmodernism.
Yeah, that's right.
So interested. They have no time for it at all. Okay, they think it is. They look at it as culture side. Okay, he said, no, we try to preserve our culture. Look at these people; they're doing everything in their power to destroy their own culture. One good upside of all of this here is Netflix is out of Russia. Maybe that's a good thing. Okay, because of all the cultural garbage that Netflix generates and projects to as a form of soft power for the United States and its Western allies. It's fundamentally, it gets down to something that's very simple. The political class of the Atlanticist political class, they will not tolerate a country saying no, and Russia says no. That's a simple answer to all of these things.
Yeah, got a little bit of breaking news too. Well, I mean, it broke about an hour ago, but we've been talking. For those who have been looking at what's going on with the Fed, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Democrat from West Virginia, released a statement. He will not support the nomination of Sarah Bloom Raskin at the Fed. So that nomination is dead because without Joe Manchin, that's a wrap. So I think Joe Manchin, listening to some of his statements, is really, really, really getting concerned about inflation. Like, so most people are just kind of going along to get along. They're so stupid. And you have a Democrat here saying at the core of this problem is spending money and people who think it's okay to spend unlimited amounts of money. It's why, if you guys remember, he killed Biden's bill. It was one of the main reasons why he killed the last Build Back Better. He said, you know, if you think inflation is a pain now, this was at the end of 21. They tried to do it during the holidays so all of you wouldn't be paying attention. And Manchin put out a very long, thoughtful statement. Number one, he didn't think it was really building back anything better. And number two, he thought it was what it was, a wish list of goodies for the left. And the other main concern was that we already had spent trillions on the CARES Act. Trillions on another CARES Act, I guess Joe Biden thought he needed to do too, just to one-up Trump. And even though the schools were funded, which he went on and on about, you know, CDC regulations, the schools were funded to comply with them. There was big billions and billions in there just went to teachers unions, as Joe Manchin knows. It didn't go to really getting schools together, gentlemen. And now we have this Fed post that he will not support because clearly he wants the Fed to get serious about combating inflation, and he wants at least some of the Senate to start and the Congress to get serious about the ultimate cause of inflation, which is increasing the money supply beyond market forces. So, you know, I want to ask, we got a few minutes, but I want to ask this. A month ago, I would have told you I didn't foresee this in at least the short to midterm. But now with how Biden has dealt with this, it's like, look, we're all over here being pretty much proponents against war. But you have to have a certain level of strength, and your adversaries have to believe you're confident and even a level of vicious to be able to deter them from doing something stupid. And a month ago, I would have said, no, I'm not really concerned about this. But because of how badly I'm sorry, but it's just true, how bad of a president in the foreign policy space Joe Biden has become. I'm very concerned about Taiwan. And you have China put out that statement saying this is not at all a similar situation. And everybody thought, oh, phew, they're not going to be like Putin. They said, no, you misunderstand us. Taiwan is China. Ukraine is not Russia. That is ours. So if we take it, we're not taking it because we can't take something by definition that's already ours. And I read that and I thought, oh, dear God. You know, so where do you guys see, do you think that how this event plays out can absolutely impact the Chinese thought process on Taiwan? I'll go with George.
I really do, because if you remember, when Putin went to Beijing to inaugurate the Olympics, when he arrived there, Russia and China published that big, long, detailed strategic partnership agreement. The strategic partnership agreement meant, it was quite explicit there, that they had one another's back. So you have your security problems, we have our security problems, and we will always support you in your security problems as you will ours. And of course, I'm sure Putin disclosed to Xi his plans for Ukraine, which means, because there it is in that agreement, explicitly they say, Taiwan is a part of China. I mean, that's it. They're both in accord with that. So I think there's a good likelihood, certainly there's a strong likelihood that Xi Jinping will want to wrap up the Taiwan problem. That might be his historic accomplishment, that he has finally brought the Taiwan issue to a close. And since Xi Jinping has done a lot to help Putin on Ukraine, he will expect Putin to reciprocate, and I'm sure Putin will reciprocate. And if it doesn't come to an armed conflict, I think the Russians will support the Chinese.
Yeah, Peter, last words. You know, a month ago when the three of us were talking about this, or a little bit over a month ago, I think all three of us would have said we're not there yet. But this is happening. And one commenter, I just saw it on the screen. None of us thought this would happen this fast. But what do you think now, Peter?
I'm in agreement with George. And maybe one caveat here. Again, sending high-level American officials, more arms, and all of that. And the Chinese and the Russians have drawn the same conclusion. This rules-based order, whatever that means, is a threat to both of them, to Russia and to China. And so, if the rules-based order is determined by one party or one major party and associated parties in that main party's orbit, if they're going to determine what the rules of engagement are for international relations, the Chinese will say, and the Russians will say, well, then what do we need international law for? Because you don't need it. Okay, so why should it apply to us but not to you? And so basically, what the Chinese and the Russians, the conclusions they're drawing is that we're in a free-for-all. You guys do it, so we have the assets, the ability, the desire, the ambition to do the same. Okay, it's not a world really that I'm very happy about, but that's where we are. It's the West that has done this. They're the ones. It's the West with NATO encircling Russia. We hear and talk of a Pacific NATO. What is that for? Oh, we're a defensive inoculation. What Joe and I like to keep saying about Stoltenberg. Okay, no, these are offensive, and we've seen that NATO, through its political malpractice, has created the possibility for this conflict that we see in Ukraine. So the Chinese are saying, okay, I mean, we've tried to understand this gobbledygook from people like Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, which we have no idea. There's no Google translator out there that we can decipher what they're talking about. They see as enemy. You know what? If someone sees you as an enemy, you're probably going to see in return them as an enemy too.
In kind, Peter. That's really what it comes down to. In the end, and I know it's 2:02, so we'll wrap. But in the end, general consensus in the comments section is, damn, that happened quick. And it's very much like with that voter that I showed you the interview. It's like, I think a little bit of people, while we're seeing an increase for support for some sort of intervention, I think you're going to see a ceiling on that. And beneath the surface of it all is this deep-rooted kind of populist mentality. Like, we have these major problems, and this all escalated so badly in a year. And I think anybody with half a brain will look and say, which viewpoint is going to be the predominant viewpoint 6 months from now? Same thing with COVID, gentlemen. I told people as a pollster, the opposition, the intensity of it all is opposed to all of these draconian measures. And the rest of the country, eventually, fear always subsides. And the rest of the country will come around to that position. And, people, well, look at the polls, look at the polls. And I said back then, it's not what the polls say now. It's what you can glean from them now to tell you what they will be like in 6 months. And that there is no doubt that the general consensus is just, how did this happen this quickly? Or at least, I can't believe this happened this quickly. Where for a month, 30-day period, the three of us are like, well, I think Taiwan is a little bit of a, that may be a little bit of an irrational fear at this moment. But 4 weeks later, 28, 30 days later, it's not anymore because of how badly things have played out and how quickly they have. And people obviously see that. So who wants to tell people where they can follow you more? George, you want to do it?
We are at thegaggle.locals.com. Please see us there. We always have a great time. You can also follow me on Twitter if you enjoy Twitter. And anyway, Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Peter, add something because of the crap you've been taking over the last couple of weeks. I got to give you some time to speak your piece, brother.
What I do is I just call balls and strikes. Okay, that's all I do. I'm anti-war as you can get. I am brokenhearted that Russians and Ukrainians are killing each other. That is just it's an abomination for me. But as we've said in our chat here, is that this was a concocted strategy by NATO. It was so poorly thought out over last 25 years, 30 years. This is what we've gotten. Okay, and what I would just hope is that some rational voices in Ukraine say, we got to settle this. We got to settle this now. We must end the bloodshed. But this was made in NATO headquarters, not in the Kremlin.
I was saying, what are we going to see you in roughly 2 weeks? And
in 2 weeks,
thank you
exactly.
for
2
coming
weeks
on.
today. So today is the 14th. So
That's what I thought.
you will be our guest on the 28th. So really looking forward to it. It's always a great conversation.
Have some new polling data for you too.
Excellent.
I'll have some nice fresh stuff we can go over. Plus, the poll we just did is huge. Probably take that long to go over how much is in it. But yeah, guys, as always, thanks for coming on. Great conversation.
Thank you so much. Always a
really
great
appreciate
conversation.
it.
Thank you so much.
All the best, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
See you.
Check out Peter and George at the Gaggle, ladies and gentlemen, thegaggle.locals.com, but they're also on YouTube and I believe on Rumble now too. But I do see them streaming on YouTube. So yeah, great conversation as always. It's nice to have different points of views, especially with people who know the area, right? And know the history. All right, so with that, I got to do a real quick announcement before we go. One is, again, I got to remind everybody every show, at least at the end. If you bought People's Pundit merch, use the locals thing if you have to, but shoot us over a picture of you with the merch on and to let us know whether we can use it. We're putting together a montage, and the more the merrier, which would be great. We'd love to see you in your People's Pundit merch. All right. Also, locals, tomorrow, we're going to do a live stream that is separate from Inside the Numbers or What Are the Odds. We're just going to do a locals live stream to go over the public polling project much more in depth. You probably will get something later today. It's a large survey, so we pretty much have all the responses we need. We're good to go, and I already have started to process some of it, and you probably will get some at this point later in the day. But tomorrow, I thought it would be cool if we'd go over a live stream. That we would do a live stream and go over it. Where I can give you guys links that I don't really want everyone to have, and we can go over it together, and you can have that information in front of you while we do. Very big. I got to tell you, one thing that jumped right out at me. This was the anniversary of the Public Polling Project national tracking. This was the anniversary poll. We started in March of last year, and I believe it was like March into April when the first poll was conducted. So we're a little bit before, but let's call it March. We had some stuff that we asked people from last year so we can get some tracking on that, but we also asked a ton of new things that we would not have asked about last year. Generic ballot, hypothetical matchups for president, right? Down the line. But we had our trusted institutions we're going to revisit. Looking at just the raw and seeing views and where people are leaning and their ideologies, it is not typical for a presidential party to lose affiliation. Look, registration's one thing. It's more static. But when you talk to people, especially, it's great that you know their registration. I've been telling you since before the end of 2021, before the holidays around Thanksgiving, that I saw a shift in self-reporting affiliation. What do I mean by that? We know we're on the phone with the Democrat and they're telling us they're an independent. Or maybe they're telling us they're a Republican. We're on the phone with an independent and they're telling us they're a Republican, right? That's self-reported political identification or affiliation. When we started the Public Polling Project, it was actually a bump for Democrats, comparing it to what we know the voter file actually is. It was a modest bump, which you would expect after somebody wins the White House. It's kind of like the impression the public has. The Democrat won, so some people will say, yeah, I voted for Biden, I'm an independent, but I'm going to say I'm a Democrat. That's typical. It is not typical to see in the first year a collapse of that affiliation. Not for winners, anyway. And like you saw under George W. Bush, more people started to identify as being Republican. The same thing happened with Ronald Reagan, even though Democrats far outnumbered Republicans during both of Reagan's landslide wins. Under Donald Trump, more people started to say they were Republican. And that didn't really fade until after the midterms, and that changed. This is a very immediate collapse of self-reported Democratic Party affiliation. And we are seeing some of the state registration numbers, for instance, in North Carolina, even though one of the headlines just today counts the independent surge in North Carolina. It obviously Democrats are losing voters. And when I look at affiliation and compare it to what I know about association, there are a lot of people who are not Republicans saying they're Republican. It's that simple. The rise of the independent for us is that's an overblown story. Because that is registration. What are they telling you when you actually call them or you actually talk to them and interview them? They're telling you they're Republican. That is a very, very ominous sign for Democrats ahead of the 2022 midterms. And we will talk about that tomorrow on the live stream, because on the live stream, I will give you numbers of where we started out, both raw, unweighted, and weighted last year, and then where we started out this year, both unweighted and weighted. And Gallup finally came around. Even the ABC News, Washington Post poll, when using their likely voter model, finally came around. But I can tell you with certainty that it was, and maybe others did as well, just they weren't as public about it. Rasmussen changed their weights at the end of last year for a reason. And we changed, we don't change our weights, but we could see the shift in our polling, and you can see the change in our projected registered voter universe and likely voter universes, our electorates. You can see that they have changed. We changed them because it warrants that change. And when you see the exit polls on election night, or you see the voter analysis on election night, do not be surprised if you see a historically large Republican electorate. I mean, the national electorate could be like R4. I'm not kidding. Because even in 2010, we did not see that kind of advantage. It was generally even, and Republicans carried independents. If we're right around even now, and this keeps up, and Republicans don't screw up, which is part of the questions we talked about today, then this can be an overwhelmingly leaning electorate. And it's not because of age. It's not because of younger voters staying home. We saw this in New Jersey. We saw it in Virginia. And we've seen it in other races around in Texas, by the way. There are just people who, never voted in a midterm. They're presidential election voters, like the gentleman I spoke about earlier in the show. They will vote in this midterm. And a lot of pollsters are going to screw up. Mark my words. They're going to screw up. They're going to pull almost like the 16 all over again. They're not going to believe these people because of their records, and they're going to screen them out. You watch. Mark my words. And number two, so you have those entries of first-time midterm voters, but also number two, you have a lot of voters that would have called themselves independents in 2020. And they're going to call themselves Republicans now. So this electorate is at this point, there's what is happening is nothing less than a complete collapse of Democratic affiliation. And by the way, take that into consideration when you see the YouGov D+9 polls. All right. And the Morning Consult D+6 and above. Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't fudge the numbers to get a national to D+6 at this moment. It is that bad for Democrats when it comes to affiliation. But we'll talk about that more on Locals. So if you're watching on YouTube, give us that like, subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we go live. But also very much consider signing up for Rumble, People's Pundit Rumble channel. And while you're there, and if you're on there right now, check out the Join Locals button. And if you, like I said, now is a really good time to join the peoplespundit.locals.com community, because we're going to be doing a lot of polling. You're going to be seeing a lot of polling that other people aren't going to see. You're going to be doing a lot of analysis. Oh, by the way, I have a complete calendar for you guys, locals. I have a complete primary calendar that I'll put up as a PDF or an image soon. But we'll also be making a map kind of. And I was in the middle of doing that when one of my vendors was like, "Oh, that's what you're doing? Here, we already have all the dates put down for you. Stop your research." It was great. So I have that information. They said, "Go ahead, give it to you." But also, I'll give you an interactive you can play with if you're looking for your specific area, which will be a nice resource. All right. So again, a good time to join locals. So consider doing it. Getter, thanks for viewing. If you don't follow me on Getter already, go ahead and do so at People's Pundit. You can follow the producer, my wife, Laura, as well. She's on the profile. It's at Laura Barris, but you can click to her right from my profile. Consider giving her a follow. She's a pip. All right. So with that, I'm out. Locals, I'll see you later. Don't miss the live stream tomorrow. And the rest of you, I'll see you on Inside the Numbers at noon Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. All right. Going to be an interesting week talking to some people about some of the behind-the-scenes stories you're just not hearing in these primaries. And these primaries are going to be very important as far as how we predict the overall general election outcome, especially in the House. There will be some nominations that are not as strong as others. So, of course, that definitely matters. But Republicans are in a little bit different of a situation here. If they blow this with these voters, Molly, I'm gonna cite her again because she said it's just so common sense. Molly Hemingway. If they blow it with these, if they go back to the Romney, McCain, Graham, Bush, they go back to that, they will lose these voters. As far as the Hispanics go, they will lose them for a generation again. All right. So with that in mind, I'm out. All right, guys. Have a good day. Thanks for watching as always. Everybody, see you on Wednesday. Locals, see you later. All the best, folks. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. Deuces.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
We can get on a plane and take a one-way ride. Steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a knife. So give in to the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow